over and over and over and over again, always involved in every aspect of the campaign, from its initial planning all the way through final conquest. And in this way, the column serves as a kind of propaganda film.
The column's exact height holds a more subtle significance.
The height of Trajan's column itself, 100 feet, with the addition of the base and a statue on top of that, marked the height of the side of the Quirinal Hill, which was removed to create the forum at that spot. Therefore, it becomes a marker not only of the battles of Trajan, but also the battles of Apollodorus to clear the land and create this monumental urban space.
Trajan's forum stood for 700 years. Most of it was reduced to rubble by a 9th century earthquake. But there is one surviving section that leaves no doubt about its imposing scale, a vast complex known as Trajan's Market. Apollodorus shored up the 125-foot cliff face he had created by form-fitting a 6-story Roman shopping mall directly into the hillside. He ingeniously shaped the first 3 levels in a hemicycle, a semicircular structure with long, curved corridors of storefronts.
The markets function to reinforce the hillside, which had just been carved out. And it's probably not by chance that the form that's used against that hillside is concave, therefore a much stronger form, again the form of an arch turned on its side to resist the pressure of the hill beside that.
Above the hemicycle were 3 more levels, with units ranging from small shops to great 3-storied halls. Trajan's Market contained over 150 individual storefronts that might have supplied everything from footwear to fine art.
These markets must have sold enormous quantities of materials from all parts of the Roman world, and perhaps even beyond.
While Trajan's Forum next door was a lavish haven for the city's elite, his market was engineered as a main street for the masses.
The market, together with the forum, represent 2 sides of Roman culture. The opulence of the forum, its colonnaded forecourt, its gilded decorations, represented a tremendous formal center for the city. Right next to that, the brick architecture of the marketplace, very commonplace in the city for the daily lives of the Roman citizenry.
Trajan's engineering feats at home and conquests abroad made him one of the most popular emperors in Roman history. By the end of his reign in 117 AD, the empire had reached its greatest size, stretching across the Middle East to the Persian Gulf. But defending more territory would prove problematic for Trajan's successor. So to stabilize the empire's borders, Rome's next emperor would build a massive barricade to seal off the Roman world from the barbarians beyond. By the time he died in 117 AD, Emperor Trajan had propelled the Roman Empire to the height of its size and wealth. But the drawbacks of such a widespread dominion would soon become evident. Trajan had no biological sons, so upon his death, control of the empire passed to his adoptive son, Hadrian.
Hadrian, like Trajan, was a military man and an accomplished one. Hadrian saw that the empire would be unable to maintain its expanded borders. The longer the borders are extended, of course, the more money it takes to be able to maintain border defenses. So he wasn't looking for more things to conquer, but how to hold on to what they already had.
Concrete evidence of Hadrian's defensive policy shift can be found today in a remote section of northern England, 1,500 miles from Rome. When Hadrian came to power in 117, the northern half of Britannia remained an untamed frontier, where Roman soldiers confronted the dual threats of freezing winters and barbarian incursion. So in 122 AD, Hadrian paid a personal visit to the front lines. The emperor quickly concluded that the only way to tame Britannia was to tame his own soldiers first.
The Romans always believed you have this group of men who are serving the Roman state, make them work. If you're not disciplined, the thought is these Roman soldiers are just going to start frittering away their time and gambling and not doing the right thing.
Hadrian put his legions to work on the most ambitious fortification ever conceived by a Roman. A towering 73-mile defensive wall across the entire country. Today, the pilfering of time has reduced Hadrian's wall to its foundations. But it once towered 15 feet high, with parapets rising an additional 6 feet above that. A 9-foot ditch was dug at its base, forcing potential invaders to make a 30-foot climb before coming face to face with the Roman legions on the other side. And if invaders did miraculously make it over the wall and past the Roman guards, they had one last obstacle to slow their advance: the vallum, a 120-foot wide ditch that ran behind the wall from coast to coast. Hadrian's wall was as much a psychological barrier as a physical one. Its monstrous, unending facade served as an unnerving reminder of Rome's indisputable dominance.
In some ways, you might be able to compare Hadrian's Wall to the Berlin Wall. And that is a wall that's intended both to keep people out and to keep people in, and to prevent a kind of mixing that goes uncontrolled.
Hadrian's Great Divide would be the Roman world's largest stone fortification. One made all the more challenging and effective by northern Britannia's jagged terrain.
The engineers positioned the wall in as strategic a location as possible. It's often running along cliff edge just above a drop to the north. But in principle, the natural geology of the landscape would help them build a bigger defensive structure. The main problem with that, from an engineering point of view, is the difficulty of getting materials to that site to build the wall.
3 legions, totaling between 15 and 25,000 men, were needed to undertake the back-breaking task of moving heavy stone blocks to the construction site. But the wall was only one component of Hadrian's grand design. Every Roman mile, the legions built a guard post into the wall called a mile castle, which housed up to 60 troops at a time. Between each mile castle stood 2 smaller watchtowers, where sentries kept a constant eye on the borderland. And along the length of the wall, 17 enormous superforts were built that could house 1,000 Roman soldiers.
What this in effect did was kind of create a military zone that allowed the Romans to maintain enough military strength right along the wall to go out in force, patrol along the front, conduct maintenance, and still maintain the kind of military presence that was effective as well as impressive.
Each superfort covered 3 to 5 acres and included an assembly hall, a temple, barracks, hospital, and bathhouse, everything needed to sustain an army. Around these forts, towns sprung up to satisfy the army's constant demand for food and supplies.
These Roman troops wanted Roman shoes, they wanted Roman needles, they wanted all the things that they could have elsewhere in the Roman world. So trade tends to follow them. Bars tend to follow them. Women tend to follow them, and end up changing fundamentally the areas in which they are settled.
In just 5 years, Hadrian's vast barrier across Britain was complete. The the emperor had secured Rome's northwest border, improved discipline within his ranks, and created an unmistakable testament to the vast reach of Roman power. In 126 AD, Hadrian returned to Rome. There he would commission one of Rome's most celebrated engineering marvels and eliminate its most celebrated engineer. In 126 AD, Emperor Hadrian returned to Rome after a 5-year military inspection tour on the Roman frontier. While he was away, his builders had been working feverishly to carry out his architectural vision in the capital city.
Hadrian certainly wanted to leave an imprint on Rome. He wanted to revive Augustan building and show that he could do better.
150 years earlier, Emperor Augustus had famously transformed Rome from a city of brick into a city of marble. Hadrian wanted his own building legacy to be equally memorable, and the crown jewel in that legacy would have a direct link to the reign of his legendary predecessor. Soon after he became emperor, he set his sights on rebuilding a burned-out temple complex dating from the time of Augustus. In the rubble of the old ruin, he commissioned his most famous structure, the Pantheon, a majestic temple to the Roman gods.
The Pantheon is arguably the most amazing structure ever built by the Romans. Why? The Rotunda.
The Rotunda, a huge interior space capped by a magnificent dome ceiling, was the heart of the Pantheon's design. At its center, the concrete dome rises nearly 150 feet. It spans exactly the same length across without any support from columns or buttresses.
150 feet is a great distance to span. And the guts that they had to attempt something so wide, to span something so wide, this is one of the grand achievements.
The Pantheon's dome would remain the largest unsupported concrete span in the world for 18 centuries. Before Hadrian's engineers could start pouring the dome's concrete ceiling, they needed to figure out how to direct its weight away from its center. Otherwise, when they removed the wooden framework holding the ceiling in place, 3,000 tons of concrete would collapse under its own weight.
Today, when we build in concrete, we introduce a steel tension rod, which picks up half of the stresses in the concrete. The Romans couldn't do this. Therefore, the dome of the Pantheon was constantly pushing outward towards its base.
The Pantheon's engineers developed several radical solutions to make sure its ceiling and the emperor's reputation wouldn't come crashing down. First, they built a solid base of walls 20 feet thick to act as a foundation for the ceiling.
They used the vertical walls on either side to help support the weight of the dome from pushing outwards. They used the walls to buttress the dome itself.
Next, as the ceiling rose toward its apex, they mixed in lighter materials with the cement and poured a progressively thinner layer of it.
Roman concrete, like concrete today, used aggregate, usually stones, to bond the concrete together. In the Pantheon's dome, Romans used a common technique at that time of actually inserting hollow amphora or jugs inside of the concrete to displace some of the concrete and lighten the load.
To make the ceiling even lighter, the builders molded recessed panels called coffers into the ceiling, which served two ingenious purposes.
These coffers are meant, obviously, for an aesthetic purpose. That is, that they allow the surface of the domed area to be decorated. But at the same time, they reduce the amount of concrete which is necessary for the dome itself.
A final weight-shedding alteration